Yes, I'd have to go through all the many regrets in my life and the many.
At 89 years old, Woody Allen has finally broken his silence. Not through a press conference, not through an official statement, but through private conversations that have only now come to light. Sources close to him say he was deeply distraught and shocked by her passing. But it's worth noting that it was so sudden.
Privacy issues, abortion issues, an enormous amount of pressure.
They'd known each other for 56 years. They made 9 films together. She wasn't just his greatest muse, but also his most loyal defender, the woman who never really left his life. And now, what Woody Allen has revealed in the wake of her death, things he had never spoken of before, are turning everything we thought we knew about their relationship upside down. Because this story isn't just about a director and his actress, it's about delusion, devotion, and the kind of truth that even they may never have been ready to face. This is the story of a love so complicated, so tangled, yet so real that it couldn't survive as romance, but refused to die as a bond. Did he ever take it seriously? He did, in those sleepless nights when the phone rang at 4 a.m., carrying threats and a fear so vivid it felt alive. For decades, we saw their relationship only through the lens of Annie Hall, through the romantic comedies, through the public image that seemed flawless. I think a relationship is like a shark. You know, it has to keep moving forward or it dies. But the truth was different. Far more complex, more painful, and more human than anything Woody Allen ever put on screen. She stood by him when the entire world turned away, defended him when it cost her everything. And now, at 89, facing his own mortality, Allen finally tells the real story. The story of the woman who saved him, the love he couldn't hold on to, and the regrets that still haunt him. In 1969, Woody Allen was casting his Broadway play, Play It Again, Sam. He saw dozens of actresses, all talented, all beautiful, but all forgettable. Then Diane Keaton walked in. She was just 23 years old, fresh from California, dressed in mismatched clothes, speaking in a way that made no logical sense, yet somehow, every word felt utterly sincere. Woody Allen would later recall that first impression with words that now sound almost prophetic: adorable, funny, totally original, real, and full of life. But what he never said publicly, what friends only reveal now, is that he was terrified. Because she was everything he wasn't. She was light where he was dark, hopeful where he was cynical, free while he was trapped inside his own mind. He cast her on the spot, not just because she fit the role perfectly, but because he couldn't stand the thought of not seeing her again. Within weeks, they started dating. Within months, she moved into his apartment. Their friends gave them 6 months at best. How could it possibly work? He was a neurotic Jewish intellectual from Brooklyn, a man who overanalyzed everything to death. She was a California girl, carefree and genuine, who said, yeah, and meant it with her whole heart. He lived in his head. She lived in the moment. He collected anxieties, and she collected joy. And yet, somehow, impossibly, it worked. At least for a while. From 1969 to 1971, those were the happiest years of Woody Allen's life. Decades later, he would admit to close friends that with Diane, he finally felt seen, not as Woody Allen the comedian, not as the filmmaker, not as the public figure, but as Alan Konigsberg, the shy kid from Brooklyn who never felt good enough. She had this way of looking at him, really looking, that made him feel, for a moment, like maybe he was okay after all. They would walk for hours through Central Park, and she would point at clouds, dogs, children playing, finding wonder in the ordinary. It amazed him. He had never understood how someone could simply be happy without a reason, without analysis, without needing to know why. She tried to teach him that, but he couldn't learn it. His nature wouldn't let him. Living together began to reveal the cracks. Woody became controlling in ways that looked like love but weren't. He wanted to know where she was, who she talked to, what she was thinking. Every moment, he tried to rewrite her, to make her more refined, more intellectual, more like the women in his films. But Diane resisted. Not with anger, that wasn't her style, but with quiet defiance. When he corrected her grammar, she'd smile and say it wrong again. When he suggested better books, she'd stick to her photography magazines. When he criticized her fashion choices, she'd show up the next day in something even stranger. It drove him crazy, but it also made him love her more. She was the one thing in his life he couldn't control, couldn't direct, couldn't shape into his vision, and that's what made her dangerous. Friends from that time remember their arguments, not shouting matches, but cold intellectual dissections, where he would analyze her thoughts, her choices, her very being. And she'd just look at him with those eyes and say softly, "You think too much." It infuriated him, because she was right. The breaking point came in 1971. Francis Ford Coppola was casting The Godfather. Through connections, Diane landed an audition for K. Corleone. At first, she almost didn't go. Woody dismissed the idea. "A gangster movie? That's not your style. You've got Play It Again, Sam with me." But something in her, curiosity, instinct, maybe the first whisper of rebellion, made her go anyway. And she got the part. She hadn't even read the script. "I just needed a job," she said later in interviews. But those close to them knew the truth. She needed more than work. She needed escape. When she told Woody she'd be in California for months, that she'd miss his film, he didn't shout. He just went silent, that cold, wounded silence that hurt more than any words. "You're choosing Coppola over me," he finally said. "You're choosing them over us." She tried to explain, "It's not about choosing. It's about my career, my life." But he couldn't hear it. To Woody, it was betrayal, plain, simple, unforgivable. And she left anyway. Something between them broke that never fully healed. While Diane was filming The Godfather, something else happened, something Woody would obsess over for years. She fell for Al Pacino. Not immediately, not openly, but it was real. The chemistry on screen was undeniable because the connection off-screen was real. Pacino was everything Woody wasn't: physical, emotional, dangerously alive. Where Woody intellectualized, Pacino felt. Where Woody analyzed, Pacino acted. And that changed everything. After 2 years of living under Woody Allen's quiet control, Diane Keaton found in Al Pacino a completely different kind of energy. They didn't officially date back then, but a seed had been planted, and Woody knew it. He could see it in the footage, in the way she looked at Pacino on screen. Friends recall that Woody became obsessed with The Godfather during its production. He would ask around constantly, reaching out to mutual friends for updates about the shoot, about Diane, about her co-stars, trying to piece together what was happening 3,000 miles away. When Diane finally returned to New York, everything had changed. She was more confident, more self-assured, no longer the woman who deferred to his every judgment. She had been directed by Coppola, acted alongside Pacino and Brando, and become part of something vast, something that mattered. Woody's intellectual comedies suddenly seemed small in comparison. They tried to make it work. She even starred in his next 2 films, but the dynamic had shifted. Diane was no longer his discovery, no longer his muse or protege. She was a movie star in her own right. And Woody couldn't handle it. Their relationship officially ended in 1972. Some said Woody ended it, others said Diane walked away, but everyone agreed on one thing. She was exhausted from being analyzed, corrected, shaped, treated like a project instead of a person. Diane wanted to be loved for who she was, not for who he wanted her to become. But Woody couldn't love her that way. He loved the idea of her, the character of her, the role she played in his life. The real Diane, messy, emotional, gloriously unpredictable, frightened him. You'd think that would be the end. A breakup, time passes, life moves on. But Woody Allen doesn't move on. In 1977, 5 years after they split, he made Annie Hall, and he cast Diane Keaton as the lead. The movie wasn't inspired by their relationship. It was their relationship. Scene after scene pulled directly from real life. The arguments, the awkward silences, even the name Annie Hall. Annie was her real nickname. Hall was her birth surname before she changed it to Keaton. Woody wrote the role specifically for her. No one else could have played it. He even had her wear her own clothes from when they dated. The vests, the ties, the oversized men's shirts. That wasn't costume, it was her. He put their entire relationship on screen, every private moment, every wound, every flaw, and made her live it again for the world to see. Some called it genius, others called it exploitation. Diane herself called it strange and painful. But she did it anyway. Despite everything, the control, the emotional manipulation, the heartbreak, she still trusted him as a director, still believed in his vision, and maybe, deep down, wanted to preserve what they once had, even if only through the distorted lens of his art. Annie Hall won Best Picture, and Diane Keaton took home Best Actress. Suddenly, the whole world thought they knew their story, but the film wasn't the truth. Woody Allen had rewritten the ending. In real life, their breakup was messy, painful, and unresolved. But in Annie Hall, it became bittersweet, philosophical, and strangely romantic. He had turned failure into beauty, rejection into mutual understanding, heartbreak into poetry, and Diane let him. Years later, Woody would confess to close friends that Annie Hall wasn't a love letter, it was an exorcism. He was trying to purge her from his mind, to understand why they couldn't work, to make peace with losing her. But the thing about exorcisms is, sometimes they fail. Because when the ghost is love itself, it doesn't leave. It lingers. Forever. After Annie Hall, something strange happened. Their romantic relationship was over, completely, permanently, irreversibly. But their professional connection was only beginning. From 1978 to 2020, Diane Keaton appeared in 8 Woody Allen films: Manhattan, 1979, Manhattan Murder Mystery, 1993, and others spanning 42 years. Think about that. 42 years of working together after breaking up, 42 years of being on set together, 42 years of creating art while maintaining emotional distance. A relationship that should have fallen apart, but somehow didn't. Friends say there was an unspoken understanding between them. She could have other loves, other lives, but on film, she belonged to him. Woody needed her in his art, even if he couldn't have her in life. He once told a close friend, "Every actress I work with gets compared to Diane. Every performance is measured against her." He worked with brilliant women, Mia Farrow, Diane Wiest, Scarlett Johansson, Cate Blanchett, but none of them were Diane Keaton. None had that strange luminous spark that made his words come alive in ways even he hadn't imagined. That bond came at a cost. It strained Diane's other relationships, especially with Al Pacino. Their on-again, off-again romance lasted 15 years, from 1974 to 1990. And through it all, Woody was there, not physically, but as a ghost, a name that never stopped echoing. Diane would leave Pacino to film with Woody, praise Woody's genius, his vision, his brilliance, and Pacino, confident as he was, found himself competing with a man he could never defeat. How do you fight someone who's already lost? That's what Woody was, a man who had lost her, yet somehow still possessed her. Woody had no claim on her love anymore, so there was no threat, no rivalry. But emotionally and creatively, the bond remained unbreakable. Pacino wanted marriage, commitment, her full attention, but Diane couldn't give it. Not because she didn't love him, "I was crazy about him," she admitted later, but because part of her still belonged to Woody, a part she couldn't explain, couldn't escape. Then, in 2014, everything changed. Dylan Farrow's accusations against Woody Allen resurfaced, and they were devastating. Hollywood turned its back immediately. Actors issued statements. Directors fell silent. Award shows stopped honoring him. By 2018, with the hashtag #MeToo movement in full force, Woody Allen had become Hollywood's pariah. Everyone abandoned him, except Diane Keaton. In January 2018, she posted a short tweet, "Woody Allen is my friend, and I continue to believe him." Just 13 words, but they destroyed relationships, cost her roles, and made her a target of public outrage. Judd Apatow attacked her publicly, supporters of Dylan Farrow called her an enabler, and countless opinion pieces branded her delusional, blindly loyal, on the wrong side of history. She lost work, lost films, lost friends. Directors who had once admired her backed away, and her name became as controversial as Woody's. But Diane refused to back down. In 2023, 5 years into the storm, she gave an interview that made things even worse. When asked whether working with Woody Allen had overshadowed her career, she smiled and said, "No, not at all. I'm proud." When asked if she regretted standing by him, Diane Keaton smiled and said softly, "I'm proud, proud beyond measure." Then, almost offhandedly, she added something that would ignite a firestorm. She called survivor culture a terrible shame and said, "You've got to get over it." The backlash was instant and merciless. Social media exploded, headlines condemned her, friends stayed silent. But Diane didn't apologize, didn't explain, didn't retreat. She stood firm, even as her reputation crumbled. What made her so fiercely loyal, so unyielding, to a man she hadn't dated in over 50 years? Woody Allen had never asked her to defend him. He never sought her loyalty. But she gave it, freely, completely, and at great personal cost. Because, to her, it wasn't about denial. It was about belief. After 5 decades of knowing him, of seeing him at his best and worst, his brilliance and his brokenness, she simply didn't believe the accusations. Maybe she was wrong. Maybe her loyalty was misplaced. But it was real, and it was hers. Diane Keaton knew the price and paid it willingly. By 2024, her health had begun to decline. Quietly. Privately. The woman who had lived half a century in front of cameras hid her illness completely. She grew thinner, frilier. She canceled projects, turned down appearances. But she said nothing. No public statements, no farewells, no warnings. Those close to her would later say that was so Diane, private to the end. On October 11, 2025, at 8:08 a.m., paramedics were called to her Brentwood home. She was rushed to a nearby hospital, where she was pronounced dead shortly after arrival. The official statement was brief. Diane Keaton, age 79, has passed away suddenly. No cause. No explanation. Just an ending. When Woody Allen got the call, he reportedly sat in silence for a long time. Then, barely above a whisper, he said, "I didn't even know she was sick. How is that possible?" For a man who had known her for 56 years, who had worked with her 9 times, and been defended by her when the entire world turned away, the realization hit like a blow. He hadn't known. He hadn't seen. He'd been too lost in his own exile, his own isolation, to notice that she was fading. The funeral was small and quiet. Family, a few old friends, no spectacle. Woody attended, masked and hunched, looking every one of his 89 years. In his hands, he carried a framed black and white photograph. Taken in 1970, on the set of Play It Again, Sam. In it, they're both laughing, really laughing, the kind of laughter that comes from pure joy, untouched by artifice. Several mourners cried when they saw it. Meryl Streep, who was there, later told a friend that Woody broke down completely. Not quiet, dignified tears, but shaking, uncontrollable sobs. She said she'd never seen him like that. Nobody had. Woody Allen, the man who intellectualized everything, who spent a lifetime turning pain into philosophy, couldn't rationalize this. The loss stripped him bare. Days later, a secret emerged. He had written a letter to Diane, a long, unfiltered confession, full of things he'd never said aloud. But he wrote it too late. She died before he could send it. Before she could read the words that might have finally told her the truth. And then, just a few days after her passing, Woody Allen began to speak. Not to the press. Not to cameras. But in quiet, private conversations, the first real words he'd said about her in years. In the quiet aftermath of Diane Keaton's death, Woody Allen began to talk, not to journalists or cameras, but in private conversations with old friends, longtime collaborators, the few people who still lingered in his orbit. And what he said, after decades of silence, was raw, unfiltered, and shockingly honest. "I was too controlling," he admitted. "And she was too free. I kept trying to turn her into someone easier to understand, and she kept fighting by being exactly herself. I loved her, but I loved the idea of controlling her more. That wasn't love. That was ownership. And she was right to leave." Then, he said something that completely reframes the legacy of Annie Hall. I gave her the Oscar, but she gave me everything else. The film, the career, the credibility, the soul of my work. Without her, I'm just another neurotic man making comedies about neurotic people. With her, I was creating something real. When the topic turned to the other women in his life, he didn't hesitate. I loved Mia differently. Soon-E differently. But Diane, I loved her the most honestly. She saw the real me, the insecure, pathetic, frightened version, and she stayed. Until I made it impossible for her to. Now, at 89 years old, Woody says one phrase more than any other. I should have just let her be. He repeats it like a prayer. I should have loved her as she was, not as I wanted her to be. I should have been grateful for the miracle of her instead of trying to improve it. When asked about Diane's decision to defend him publicly during the height of the controversy, his answer cut straight to the truth. She believed me when no one else would. She stood by me when it cost her everything. I never asked her to. She did it because that's who she was. Loyal. Stubborn. True to what she believed. The world tried to change her in those final years, the same way I once did. They wanted her to apologize, to fall in line. And just like before, she said no. There was one last revelation, their final conversation, a few months before she died. They hadn't spoken deeply in years, but that day, she called him. I don't regret any of it, she told him. Not the relationship, not the films, not defending you. I was who I was, and you were who you were, and it was what it was. That was her, Woody said later. Never overthinking, never analyzing, just accepting. And now, looking back across 56 years and 9 films, what does Woody Allen want people to know? That she was right about everything, about life, about art, about not overcomplicating what should be simple. That Annie Hall wasn't truth, it was his fantasy version of the truth. That she was a better person than any character he ever wrote, and that she saved him far more than he ever saved her. Because that's what their story really was. Not a romance, not a friendship, but something in between. Something too human, too flawed, too honest to fit neatly into a category. She was his muse, his conscience, his defender, and the one who slipped away. He was her mentor, her tormentor, the man she never quite let go of, even when she should have. The irony is poetic. She never married, never found another lasting love, and yet stayed loyal longest to the one who couldn't hold her. And he, who cycled through countless younger women, never truly moved on from the California girl who saw through all his defenses. Their relationship was too messy to be romance, too intimate to be friendship, too unresolved to belong to the past, too painful to live in the present. It existed somewhere outside definition, a connection only they could understand. Now Woody Allen is old, alone, surrounded by memories and regrets. The last link to his youth, to the man he once was, is gone. The woman who shaped his art, his identity, his soul, has vanished, leaving behind only her films and the echo of what they once were. Because Diane Keaton's legacy isn't just the Oscar or the style or the iconic characters. It's that she gave Woody Allen's work its heart. She stood by him when no one else dared to, saw him clearly, and didn't turn away. And in doing so, she gave him the one thing he'd been chasing his entire life, the miracle of being loved exactly as you are. Some loves are too complicated to survive, but too powerful to ever end. Woody and Diane proved that, lived it, and left behind a story that will outlast them both.